To unpack today's topics, we have three panelists joining us, and they are, firstly, Diane Liebenberg, who is a professional engineer, a member of the CESA Quality Risk and Sustainability Committee, and a lecturer at the CESA School of Consulting Engineers for Engineering. And Diane is passionate about quality management. The second panelist is Dr. Hendrik Kirsten, who is a professional engineer, a long-standing member of the CESA Quality Risk and Sustainability Committee. He is a subject matter expert and has authored many papers and books, including the original CESA QMIG and RMIG. The third panelist is Charles Salia, who is also a professional engineer and a member of the CESA Quality Risk and Sustainability Committee. And Charles is currently the president of GIGSA, GIGSA, the Geosynthetics Interest Group of South Africa. I would like to thank the panelists greatly for joining us today. They will each deliver their presentations before the proceedings end with a question and answer session and some closing remarks. I would like to just remind them that they've been each allocated 20 minutes for their presentations. The first panelist to address us this afternoon is Diane Liebenberg, who will speak on the topic implementation of the revised CESA QMIG, which QMIG stands for Quality Management Implementation Guideline. And I'd like to hand over to Diane at this point. So over to you, Diane.
Right. Oh, thanks, Wally. Thanks for introducing me. And welcome to everyone who's joined the webinar. As Wally has said, today I'll be focusing on quality management within our industry, and specifically on the updated QMIG, which is the Quality Implementation Guideline produced by CESA. So just to give you an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today, we're first going to look at the background of the CESA management system requirements. We'll just touch on the benefits of implementing a quality system. Then the bulk of what I'm going to be talking about today talks to the three sections of the QMIG. It's basically sections 4, 5, and 6. And these deal with tools that can help you to implement an effective quality system. These tools being the 8 principles of quality management, the ISO 9001 2015 standard, and then also the CESA quality management system declarations. Once we've unpacked those, we'll just have a quick look at how we can use quality management in project delivery, specifically to prevent claims, and then also just have a look at some tips for creating and improving your quality system. Great, so as you possibly all know, CESA requires all its member firms to implement 3 management systems, namely a quality management system, an integrity management system, and project sustainability. The reason why CESA has these requirements is to ensure that it can provide the industry and specifically the clients out there with the confidence that their member firms will produce a quality service in an ethical and sustainable manner. CESA has based these management system requirements on the FIDIC management guidelines, and out of these, CESA has generated a number of its own guidelines, procedures, and practice notes. I mean, one being the QMIG that we're going to go into a bit more depth today. I've made reference to all these documents at the end of the presentation, so please feel free to consult them for further information. The FIDIC documents are available for purchase from the online FIDIC bookstore, and the CESA documents are available for free once you log in as a member to the CESA website. And then in addition to the guidance documents produced by CESA, CESA also has numerous training programs on these management systems, which are presented by the School of Consulting Engineers. So please feel free to contact them for more information. So then we get to the question of why do we need quality and what are the benefits of implementing a quality system? The 2 biggest reasons as to why we need quality is that firstly, it's going to prevent things from going wrong. And when things do go wrong, it's going to protect us against those claims and those challenges that arise. So in order to prevent things from going wrong, we must have an effective quality system. And this must be embraced and implemented throughout the organization. But even if we do have an effective quality system in place, things can still go wrong. And this is just because we all human and we will make errors. It is then that the evidence or the records that are required by your quality system will protect you. So in most cases, unfortunately, it's only when the things go wrong that most organizations see the full benefit of implementing a quality system and ultimately see the value of producing comprehensive and accurate records. So other benefits of quality is basically it can enhance your reputation, you can win more work. It also reduces risks and errors, and then naturally in the long run, it's going to save you quite a bit of money. So then we get to the big part of what we're going to discuss today is how do we implement quality? So effective steps in implementing a quality system have been provided in the QMEG. And as I said today, I'm going to go through those 3 sections just to see how the QMEG can assist you in this regard. So the first tool is the 8 principles of quality management. So the first principle is customer focus. So quality adds value for the client. Management is required to have a customer focus. I always see this as twofold. Firstly, we need to market ourselves to our clients. We need to engage with them. We need to identify key contacts. And then once we've got the client, we've won the project, we need to source feedback from the clients. And just to find out, are our clients satisfied? Because to be quite honest, if we didn't have clients, we wouldn't have a business. So customer focus is really, really important. The second principle is leadership commitment, and this is a big one. Quality must be driven by management. I've seen it so often in organizations. If there's no management buy-in, the quality system will fail. So managers must take a proactive approach to quality management, and they must lead by example. Managers need to ensure the system is planned and developed effectively. They also need to take accountability for the ultimate success or the failure of the quality system. The third principle speaks of involvement of people. When you develop your system, you must include everyone. Everyone has an important role to play in the quality system. Quality must not just be seen as an administrative function, and I think that is one of the big downfalls in most industries. You need to embrace the system and integrate it into your day-to-day sort of basis of everything that you do. Now, the fourth and the fifth principles, these actually work together. The fourth principle is a process approach. Quality management follows a process approach. So basically what this means is that your inputs are identified, and within a controlled environment, you transform them to an output. And that output then forms the input for the next process. So when we identify all these processes and we pull them together, we get to the fifth principle, which is your system approach. So with all the processes interlinked and acting together, we call that a system. And generally speaking, that is when we refer to as our quality management system. The sixth principle is continuous improvement. Because things are continually changing, we need to ensure that our quality system is changing as well. We need to identify what's gone wrong and how we can improve it. So the classic approach to deal with this is to apply the Deming cycle of plan, do, check, act. And by applying this to all of your processes, you can ensure continuous improvement within your organization. The seventh principle is the factual approach to decision making. This is the collecting and analysis of data and then basing of decisions on that data. So you need to have something factual to back up your decisions. An example of data that you can collect could be client feedback, or it could be ratings of service providers based on certain criteria. You need to use this data, you need to analyze it, and then to see how can you manage those relationships going forward. Then the last principle is your mutually beneficial supplier relations. In our industry, I think we're finding it beneficial to have long-standing relationships with certain entities just to grow our business. And by building relationships, we build trust and knowledge and understanding of each other's culture, especially when it comes to quality. And I think this is crucial when you want to deliver a quality project. Now, with the next slide, I'd just briefly like to go through the requirements of the ISO 9001 standard, which is dealt with in section 5 of the QMEG. I'm not going to delve too long on the slide, but I do think you must be aware of the major sections of the standard. So the 7 sections that we're going to go through are indicated on the slide. The red block to the left talks about management and the commitment management must have to the implementation of an effective system. Our managers need to ensure that the quality system is well developed and that resources are made available. And they must also drive these principles and, like I said, create a culture of quality within the organization. And this reiterates the second principle, which dealt with leadership commitment. The yellow block to the top refers to the context of the organization. In order to develop a quality management system, you must understand the context of the organization. So this means identifying what are your strengths, what are your weaknesses, seeing what threats are out there, what opportunities are presented to your organization. And this is generally what drives your business strategy. And it also helps you to determine what services you feel you can offer to your clients. The blue block just under that refers to planning for quality. So setting up of objectives allows us to set targets and we can measure ourselves against these targets. You also need to continually identify risk and opportunity within the organization, and you need to make plans on how to manage that. So Dr. Kirsten's going to go into much more detail with this section, specifically with risk in the next section of the webinar. And just the last little block in that blue block is because nothing should remain stagnant, we need to plan for change and we need to have strategies in place on how we're going to manage this change. Right, then the green block at the bottom of the slide refers to support services and how the organization must identify resources that will support what it does. So resources, these include your people, your infrastructure, your environment. Very important here is the assessment and ongoing assessment of the competency of your staff, as well as their awareness around the quality system. Another big factor in this section is the control of documentation. And as we said earlier on, the big reason for quality is the generation of evidence to protect you when things do go wrong. So all of these blocks basically drive the central gray block, which is project delivery. And the standard gives you a very clear indication is what is required from the start of the project to when you hand it back to your client. I just then quickly want to look at the pink and purple blocks to the right, and these have to do with performance evaluation and improvement. When working with consulting engineers in developing these systems, these are generally the areas which are not addressed. These sections speak specifically to the 7th quality principle, being the factual approach to decision making. So through the collection of data, the organization must analyze the data to see how they are performing. Like I said, examples of this could be feedback from your clients. It could also be results from audits. It could be employee surveys. So basically by analyzing that data, the organization can see where its processes are failing, and in so doing, it can correct the processes to prevent the errors from reoccurring. And this naturally leads to continual improvement. Right, so the third guideline available in the QMEG for the development of an effective quality management system is the use of the MSD, or the Management System Declaration. So CISA requires its member firms to complete this declaration and to submit it on an annual basis. The declaration is made up of a series of questions which are based on the FIDIC guidelines for quality management. You'll see just reference to relevant clauses in the FIDIC guidelines are given in the columns to the left of the declaration. Additional guidance is also given under each question. So when firms complete the declaration, they'll see that this MSD actually gives loads of guidance on how to conduct certain quality aspects within your business. And then also by submitting these declarations to CISA, CISA can assess the improvement of the development of the management systems of its members firms on a year-to-year basis. So it makes sure that they can check up to see that firms are effectively implementing a quality system. Right, so my next slide just looks at how we can use quality management to prevent things from going wrong in project delivery. This is just a very broad look at project delivery, but I've tried to focus on the risky areas which I've encountered in my career. So please also refer to the RMEG, which Dr. Kirsten will go through, and you can also refer to practice note 43, which Charles is also going to go to in a bit more detail later on in the webinar. So the first point is plan operational processes with controls. Identify steps in project delivery and ensure that certain controls and gates or approval stages have been identified. By having a standardized way of delivering your project, you also ensure staff can quickly be trained up and they know exactly what they should be doing within your organization. The second point is identify requirements in your professional services agreement. This is basically the starting point for when things go wrong. So it's therefore crucial to ensure your scope is clearly defined together with your fee. I mean, I even go to the extent to say what I exclude from my scope of services. Make sure you limit your liability both in time and cost. Make sure that when you submit in your proposal or your tender that you've identified risks, you've identified competent resources, you've identified what industry standards you're going to use. So these agreements are really important in managing your project, and they should really be the starting point for when you set up your project plan. And that brings me to the third point, which is plan your project, assess risk, resource correctly, communicate the plan. Very seldom do I see engineers planning their projects effectively. You need to have a detailed plan of how you will deliver your project. And this must touch on scope, time, cost, and quality as an absolute minimum. You also need to constantly refer back to the plan to flag problem areas and naturally to update your plan. I think this is also very critical. You need to track your plan. And most importantly of all, you need to communicate the plan to the rest of the team. The fourth point is review, check, and approve. And I can't say this enough. Check everything. I mean, check, and check again. And then make sure you retain evidence of the checks and approvals, be it in redlining of your documents, track changes, or even if it's direct markups on hard copies. If something goes wrong, you will want this evidence to back you up. I often get asked how many design reviews one should conduct on a project. And my answer to that is always, if you had to defend yourself in a court of law, how many design reviews would you like to present to protect yourself? The fifth point is manage change, both in the office and outside on site. So before implementing change, look at the impact of the change, make your client aware of the change and get approval for the change in writing prior to implementing the change. Highlight the changes on documentation. I think the worst revision I think I've ever seen is a whole drawing that's been clouded and the description in the block says changes as clouded. I mean, be descriptive, make it easy for the third party to identify that change. Then the sixth point comes to manage your outsourced processes. If you are outsourcing in the form of a sub-consultant or a specialist service, make sure you manage that process. Only start engaging with consultants or specialists who you've evaluated and have approved for this engagement. And then ensure that you review their deliverables. You don't have to review their documentation for accuracy, but you must make sure that it's adequate. So you must satisfy yourself that their documentation is adequate for you to adopt in your design going forward. The seventh point talks to records and written communication. Ensure that these are generated and retained, especially when you go to site. I've often audited projects and most of the site documentation is not returned to the office. So make sure you have copies of everything. I mean, even if it means taking a photo with your phone of that document and just making sure it actually gets back to the office. And the last one, and I think possibly one of the most important ones, is manage client perception of performance. Engage with your client and request feedback. And don't only request feedback at the end of the project. I generally request feedback during the concept stage to see how we are communicating and how we are identifying project requirements. I then like to do it again at design development stage, just to assess to see what is the quality of our documentation. And then when we get to site to see, are we checking and are we resolving errors effectively? And if you get feedback, please act on the feedback. If it's negative, don't hide it away. You need to act on negative feedback and you need to correct that client's perception of your performance. So really don't let things deteriorate with your client. And then earlier this year, I was listening to a FIDIC webinar, and a representative from Aon on the UK just stated what the largest sources of claims in the UK were. And these were basically summed up as the first one being design errors, the second one, delays in issuing of deliverables, and the third was contract administration and recording of change. So you can see, it's very evident to see that if you implement a quality system, you should be able to prevent all these things from going wrong. Right, I think I've still got time, so I quickly want to take you through some tips on how to improve or implement an effective quality system. So the first one, as we said, is create a culture of quality within your organization. So it must be seen as this is the way that we do things. It must not be a separate function to your daily role. So quality must be embedded into everything you do. People also must be made accountable. If they're not implementing the quality system, there should be negative consequences. Top management buy-in is essential. Lead by example. Okay, I think I've hammered this point enough, but get top management support when creating or improving your quality system. And you must have that culture of quality within your organization. The third point is, do not call it a quality management system. This scares people. I rather like to call it a business management system or an integrated management system. So also by doing this, you can incorporate a lot of other management systems into one. So basically this speaks to the CISA requirements. You can pull in your business ethics. You can pull in project sustainability. You can also then expand your system to include health and safety or environmental issues. Right, then we get to understand your organization, conduct thorough risk assessments in all aspects of your business. So your quality system must be designed to overcome the common risks your organization faces. And as I said, Dr. Kirsten's going to go into risk management in much more detail. So when considering risk, consider all areas within your organization. Consider your finances, consider commercial, operational, employee risk, health and safety. I mean, the list just keeps going on and on. Right, then we get to document your system electronically and ditch the hard copies. Also, get rid of long-winded procedures. When I compile a system, I like to make a system of interlinked flowcharts and one-page guidance. And then make it easily accessible to staff, because this will also encourage them to want to start using it. Identify existing documentation, processes, procedures, etc., which work for you. So try to use what you have rather than have documentation forced onto you. And this all sort of takes us into the next point as well, which says, question everything. If it does not add value, get rid of it. So if you're doing something and it's not covering a risk or it's not addressing a requirement, I mean, get rid of it. And by requirements, these could be statutory or regulatory requirements. It could be a requirement of the ISO standard, or maybe just a requirement of the organization, and possibly it could also be a client or project requirement. Right, the second last one is less is more. Start with the basics and flesh out as you improve. So you need to start with a good framework, but you don't necessarily need everything implemented at once. I mean, look at your risk assessments that you've done, identify your risky areas and address those first and get those working for you. And then the last one is be creative. Make the system appealing to the users. Your system doesn't have to follow the old school format of manuals and procedures and whatnot. I mean, look at digital tools. Go and explore the apps out there which could assist you. Look towards technology and just start doing things differently. And you'll see that when you do that, your organization will actually start embracing your quality. Right, so that is basically me done on quality management and the QMEG. As I've said, I've referenced all the documents available on the FIDIC and CISA websites on the slide. Yeah, then I wish you everyone good luck in the development and implementation of your quality management systems. And if anyone requires more information, would like to get in touch with me, please contact Wally and he'll pass on contact information. Great. Well, thanks everyone for attending. And Wally, it's back to you.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you very much. You really presented most ably on the topic of the QMEG, which is highly pertinent to the CESA member firms in terms of their reputations for excellence, and also for providing them with really valuable guidelines and tips in this regard. And just to say that the QMEG really is a cornerstone of the CESA membership offering. Next up is Dr. Hendrik Kirsten, our second panelist, who's going to address us on the topic, high-level presentation of CESA's RMEG. And RMEG stands for the Risk Management Implementation Guideline. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Kirsten. Over to you, Dr. Kirsten.
Thank you, Wally. Welcome, delegates. It is a pleasure and a privilege to talk to you today. I want to present to you a high-level overview of CESA's Risk Management Implementation Guideline. But before I do that, it occurred to me whilst Diane was speaking that it would be useful to you to know that CESA is unique in having created the concepts of Quality Risk Management Implementation Guideline and Risk Management Implementation Guideline. When we started with this about 15 years ago, we realized that there was any amount of literature available on quality management and risk management. And there was very little to guide people on how to implement quality management and risk management, and hence the development of the QMIC and the RMIC as it is today. Risk management is to reach out to an uncertain future and to bring it under control. The purpose of risk management is to preempt the hazards that may impact on your business, and the purpose of quality management is to ensure that your business is sufficiently robust to withstand the hazards that may occur. Risk or quality management in isolation cannot assure the successful outcome of your business. They are two sides of the same coin. Now, what is risk? Risk is caused by some action or by some inaction and has a harmful or a beneficial effect. Risk is a combination of the frequency of the cause of the hazard and the impact of the effect of the hazard. Risk is said to be the product of the probability of cause and the impact or the severity of the effect. What is risk management? Risk management is the process whereby the risks that can affect the operation and survival of your business are identified, evaluated, and managed either by avoiding the risks, reducing or mitigating them, transferring the risks, or accepting the risks. A high-level risk management comprises three basic sections: 2 kinds of risk that we look at, 3 levels of enterprise risk management, and 7 phases of project lifecycle risks. 2 kinds of risks. Engineering consultancies are exposed to enterprise risks and to project lifecycle risks. Enterprise risks are those that affect your business and the operation of the business, and obviously project lifecycle risks are the ones that are related to the project that you deliver. 3 levels of enterprise risk management are in rising order of complexity, informal, stepping stone, and advanced enterprise risk management. And note that it rises in order of complexity from anecdotal to qualitative to quantitative evaluations. First level, informal enterprise risk management. And we have available in this regard house rules and practice notes. FIDIC's house rules in the following categories may be adopted to informally preempt practice risks: professionalism, communication, avoiding and managing disputes, business practices, technical procedures, professional liability insurance, and fiscal and corporate liability. You'll identify these categories from your business. Alternatively, CISA's practice notes in the following categories may be adopted to informally preempt practice risks: clients and appointments, construction stage services, good business practice, legal responsibility and disputes, professional conduct and development, and quality and risk management. Various subcategories to these are presented in the practice notes to cover the multiplicity of risks to which a practice is exposed. The second level of enterprise risk management comprises stepping stone enterprise risk management, and here we're going to look at briefly at how to identify risks, what are the primary enterprise risks, and how to rank the primary risks. Stepping stone enterprise risk management requires the primary risks to the business to be systematically identified, qualitatively evaluated, and actively managed. The risks in most businesses are adequately addressed at this level. You normally don't have to go to the advanced risk management level. How to identify risks. Brief overviews of 14 risk identification methods are given in the Army guideline. The method selected is primarily based on the motivation for the study and on the type of the results required, whilst the importance of the risks determines the comprehensiveness and the cost of the study. I prefer to use fault and event tree analyses that are suitable to identify risks in most engineering practices. Primary risks are the root cause of lapses in business sustainability and survival. A small group in your firm should identify the primary risks in face-to-face workshop discussions. Identify the risks in open-minded, unconstrained pre-mortem thinking. Brainstorm the risks. Capture the risks on sticky notes and flip charts displayed against the walls. The primary risks to key aspects of the business should be limited to 30, otherwise it gets overwhelming. Rank the primary risks in terms of qualitative evaluation of the probability of each risk and subjectively assess the impact of each risk. Remember that risk is the product of the frequency of occurrence and the severity of the effect. Classify the risks in terms of qualitative risk ranking matrix you'll see in the guideline, and you're likely to take action on only 5 of the 30 primary risks. You have to guard against overwhelming yourself. This is a qualitative risk ranking matrix that you find is very common in the literature. You'll see on the horizontal scale the severity of the impact or the consequence, and on the vertical scale from 1 to 8, the probability or the frequency of occurrence. You'll see in the top right-hand corner of the diagram are the highest risks, and in the bottom left-hand corner of the diagram are the lowest risks. And obviously you want to operate at the boundary between the blue and the green and slightly into the green zone. The third level is advanced enterprise risk management. Here we want to look at the process involved, the qualitative evaluation of the frequencies, the quantitative evaluation of the frequencies, the quantitative evaluation of the impacts, thresholds for advanced enterprise risk, and the implementation of advanced enterprise risk management. In advanced enterprise risk management, the incidence and impact of the risks on the business are quantitatively evaluated and managed on an ongoing basis, and is justified only on high priority issues with small margins for cost and time overruns. And you will identify those issues in your business organization and in your projects that have small margins for cost and time overruns. Now, as I said, I use fault and event trees in my approach. However, I have to note that the compilation of fault trees for advanced enterprise risks in consultancies is very onerous, but is common to most practices. Now, it's for these reasons that we have, in fact, produced in the Army guideline a comprehensive fault tree for enterprise risks in consultancies and for projects. And you can use these fault trees as a guideline and as a checklist for the risks that you need to provide for. Now, because you've got the fully developed fault trees in the guideline, you can tailor the fault trees and save yourself an enormous amount of time by doing that as a template. Now, the quantitative evaluation of impacts. You can read impacts of risk from Table 3 in Appendix 6 of the guideline. Alternatively, you can calculate the actual value of an impact based on information available, or in the case of health and safety, you can use injury statistics on the number of incidences and on medical and insurance costs in respect of personal health and safety. Quantitative tolerable thresholds on enterprise risk are given in Appendix 7 in the guideline. This is an expression of the quantitative risk thresholds that you find in the guideline, and you'll see that this diagram is very similar in layout compared to the diagram the risk matrix that we've just looked, the risk ranking matrix that we've just looked at a few slides back. Again, this is a diagram that looks at the criteria for loss of life, and on the horizontal scale, you find the potential number of fatalities or lives lost, and on the vertical scale, you find lifetime probabilities of failure of the cause for the fatality. Now, observe that the probabilities are given in very small numbers. Don't be alarmed by that, because that is the financial and insurance industries work on those scales. And you have to tie in with these two professions, because you're looking for project finance and insurance from those professions. Now, just look at the diagram and you'll see that risk is diagonally from bottom right to top left, constant across the diagram. You start with nuclear power plant as an example in the bottom right-hand corner, where the probability of a failure of a nuclear power plant, as we all know, is and should be very low, but the consequence is very large. And you move up along the diagonal to the left as the number of fatalities involved reduce, would the likelihood of occurrence increase. You would mostly want to design along the blue line at that level of risk, but you can go to the purple line there, which in terms of the legend means as low as reasonably practically possible. So you don't want to actually exceed a risk above the purple line. The steps to implement advanced enterprise risk management are given in Appendix 7. Now, to recap, we've looked at two kinds of risk: enterprise risks, project lifecycle risks, 3 levels of enterprise risk management involving informal, stepping stone, and advanced risk management processes. And then we get to the 7 phases of project lifecycle risks. And as you would expect, these would be dealt with in the usual stages of the development of a project: feasibility, appointment, conceptual design, contract award, implementation, commissioning, and post-contract. Potential risks and possible remedies during these phases that are common to most projects are presented in extensive detail in the guideline. Now, just to relate all of this seemingly theoretical discourse to practical engineering, that is a shot of Gautrain. And we've said that risk is the combination of the likelihood of occurrence of the hazard and the magnitude of the consequence. This is the design of the Gautrain over the Dolomites north of Namapius Road to the monument. This shot is just north of the Jean Avenue crossing. And the design concept there was to create a supporting system, those U-beams that you see with the upstand flanges, potentially convey the track over sinkholes that can develop. So you can see the cause is the occurrence of a sinkhole, and the consequence of the damage is a train with several hundred people into the hole or derailed. So this illustrates quite nicely how the two aspects, the cause of the hazard and the consequence of the occurrence of the hazard, need to be brought together. Another example is what you find in a city center, where you have the potential occurrence of risks in the public spaces in the city center, and you can see pedestrians that may be affected. You can see people in motor cars, you can see people in larger vehicles and buses. And these are exercises that we've actually done. And it gets a little bit more complicated, but again, it's a combination of the frequency of occurrence of sinkholes and the consequence. You can see when you've got so many people in a public space that the consequence is actually quite severe, and therefore the likelihood of a sinkhole occurring needs to be very low. I think this is an example that most of you will appreciate. It's a sinkhole that has occurred partly underneath a residence. And again, you can imagine the combination of the likelihood of occurrence of the sinkhole and the consequence, the magnitude of the effect of the sinkhole. To wrap up, to manage risk is to favorably improve the odds of uncertainty by proactive decision making. Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, delegates, for attending. We appreciate.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kirsten, for giving us, presenting so ably, and for giving us comprehensive pointers on how to use the RMEG. And I'm sure it will prove invaluable to the member firms as they look for ways to deal with risk management in these increasingly complex and troubled times. So I'm sure that the delegates will find CSER RMEG to be of great use in their analysis. And thank you again for your presentation. Next up is Charles Celia, the third and final panelist, who's going to address us on the topic of avoiding and dealing with professional indemnity claims. I'd like to hand over to Charles now. So it's over to you, Charles. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wally, for that kind introduction. And it gives me pleasure to be presenting on this topic today, on avoiding and dealing with professional indemnity claims. Diane and Dr. Kirsten gave an excellent start to the earlier two parts of this webinar, discussing the Quality Management Implementation Guideline and as well as the Risk Management Implementation Guideline. And those two form the basis for what I'm going to be talking about. So it's a very good introduction for me. And a lot of what I'm going to say is overlap from what Dave said. But as you see throughout my presentation, there's a lot of overlap in these three topics. And it's good to reinforce the idea of quality and risk management. So the point of this webinar series on the practice notes is just to expose to our members the content that is in the practice notes. And so I'm going to be referring quite heavily to the following three practice notes, which are available on the CSER website, specifically practice notes 11, 14 and 43, and I'll delve into those in the content of my presentation. But if you'd like to know more, please reference those for further information. So just some contents of my presentation. I'm going to go through the purpose of each of those practice notes, and then I'll talk about avoiding PI claims. Then I'll go into some common causes of what has led to PI claims in the industry. I will then discuss how to deal with PI claims. and I'll finally touch on professional misconduct. So first of all, the purpose of the practice notes. You'll see that I've swapped practice note 14 and 11 around. And the reason for that is practice note 14 discusses how to prevent PI claims from taking place, whereas practice note 11 discusses how to deal with professional indemnity claims. So I thought it would make more sense to just discuss practice note 14 first. Practice note 43 gives some common causes for PI claims, and I'm going to discuss 5 of these in my presentation, but there's a total of 17 in that practice note, and if you'd like to know more, you should go and read further there. But let's talk about prevention, and I think after what Diane has presented and Dr. Kirsten, there'll be overlap here, and lots of it is ordinary common sense, but I'm just going to reiterate. And, these prevention items that you can look at fall mostly into 4 categories: communication, human error, financial implications, and technical procedures. So lots of these that I'm going to be discussing are taken directly from the practice notes, and you can also read further there. So let's start with effective communication. I just also wanted to say that the reason why I've decided to illustrate this in a Venn diagram is because there's lots of overlap between these 4. And you'll see as I go through them that, some of them are linked to each other. So effective communication. The party with the most paperwork wins is a principle that's often stated, and it encapsulates doing the following. Proofread all documents carefully. This makes sense in terms of documents that are leaving the practice. You would like these to ensure that there's no mistakes in these. Produce clear and simple drawings. And by this, one thing that comes to mind is don't have the same detail on many different drawings, which makes revision of drawings a complete mess if you haven't updated all the details. Hold regular site meetings and minute these site meetings. Maintain a site diary and maintain a site instruction book. So these are all, typical things that we do in our projects. But, as stated before, the party with the most paperwork wins, and quality management is about having the documentation to prove that you are meeting these quality aspects. And just to end off this one, communicate effectively, simply, briefly, factually, and precisely. Let's talk about human error. Human error often results from a project where the timelines don't allow for proper design, or the budget is insufficient to do everything you need to do. Your team then starts taking shortcuts, and these often lead to mistakes. So, avoid unrealistic deadlines, and avoid, going in with non-standard rates. And then also, every document that does leave the practice as stated, should be checked by at least 2 professional staff. Let's talk about financial implications. Choose your clients carefully. Try not to go with clients that will try to drive down your rates and will favor the lowest consultant. Only undertake work for which you are competent, and also decide on which projects your company can comfortably handle, and try not to undertake work where you are completely out of your comfort zone. Ensure financial viability of the professional team members. That could be all aspects, all team members involved in the project. Let's talk about technical procedures. Follow a careful checking system. Diane said, check, and check again. Use recognized standard specifications. I think, if your specifications have been used in other projects before, you're comfortable with what works and what doesn't work. Ensure competence of all team members and provide training where necessary. Carefully define all the limits of responsibility on reports and drawings. And this one, treats all projects, large and small, as important. Don't let the small ones fall through the gaps. And lastly, keep abreast of all technology development. So that's just some advice to prevent PR claims. Let's look at some useful definitions. I think by following good industry practice and acting as a reasonable person, you'll go a long way to preventing mistakes or errors that might lead to a PR claim. So good industry practice is defined as standards, practices, methods, and procedures conforming to the law and the degree of skill and care, diligence, prudence, and foresight, which would reasonably and ordinarily be expected from a skilled and experienced person or body engaged in a similar type of undertaking under the same or similar circumstances. Let's look at the definition of a reasonable person. A fictional person with an ordinary degree of reason, prudence, care, and foresight, or intelligence, whose conduct, conclusion, or expectation in relation to a particular circumstance or fact is used as an objective standard by which to measure or determine something as the existence of negligence. So I've underlined ordinary in both those definitions, as well as reasonably. So in order to go a long way to preventing PR claims, all you have to do is act as in an ordinary degree and follow a reasonable approach. But let's look at some common causes of what does lead to PR claims. Number one, consulting engineers signing contracts that they haven't read. Often the tender document goes in at the last minute, and then the client wants to meet with you and have the contract signed on the day, and they say you can read it later. But what you might be signing into is deliverables that you're not competent for, or deadlines that you can't meet, or a budget which won't cover all the work that you know you have to do. So just beware of signing contracts that you haven't read, because once they're signed, you committed. Construction management, number two, specifically taking on the role of project manager, which includes scope of work that is not necessarily covered by the PI policy. Always read what scope is covered by a PR policy and refrain from taking on work that is not covered. Often the role of a project manager is a specific item that you need to cover in your PR policy, and you need to make sure that you're covered there. Fee recovery. Often the client starts refusing to pay outstanding invoices once a claim is being discussed or on the table. Just keep in mind that in order for you to claim from your PI cover for fee recovery, there must be a claim from the client for negligence first in order for the PI policy to cover this. Number four, underquoting for a job, especially by young, inexperienced engineers. This could result in the same thing as signing a contract you haven't read. You now have to rush the work to meet the deadlines. You may have to use less experienced resources because you know you don't have the competence to do the work. And it's only going to lead to massive problems. Number five, doing the work of contractors. Allowing the client to insert contracting scope into the consultant appointment, for example, as a subcontract. Often the client doesn't want to go through the whole procurement process twice. And he says, I'll just insert this small scope of work for a contractor to build something on my site. And then whatever the contractor builds falls or fails, and the contract is with you, and it'll have to be dealt through your company. So just keep that in mind. There's 12 more of these common causes in practice note 43. So I advise you, if you'd like to go and read up more on these, they're very interesting, and that's a particularly interesting practice note. So let's talk about what happens when the professional indemnity claim does land. Let's say a mistake has happened. The first thing to do is to notify your broker. Your broker is going to be your agent in this whole process, and communicating effectively and early with your broker is the best step that you can do. I think the number one step that you could take, or the number one piece of advice you could take from our presentation, is do not admit liability. Your PI policy likely has a condition in it that says if you admit liability, then the PI policy won't be able to protect you or cover the claim. So do not do that. However, it is essential to continue communicating with your client, and if the discussion of liability does come up, refer them to your broker and say that you will be discussing this through your PI cover. One item to try and keep in mind is that it's always better to consider an alternative dispute resolution rather than going into litigation. See if settlement or mediation such as adjudication or arbitration would be possible before taking the route of going to court. And lastly, in this process, remember that just because a claim is being instituted against you does not mean that you do not have to meet the rest of your contractual responsibilities. So let the claim process run out, let your broker be involved, and continue your work as the consultant in the project. Let's look at some actions that will be taken by your insurer in the event that this does go to a court of law. The insurer will appoint an attorney and a loss adjuster if required. You are required to assist in the claim at your own costs. You will be reimbursed for expert advice that you may give, and you will be compensated for costs incurred in providing evidence in court. This is based on the typical PI policy, and it will obviously be dependent on what your specific policy says. Legal costs will be paid by insurers as part of the cover of the insurance policy, and you will only be liable for payment of your excess should you lose the claim. If an allegation of professional misconduct is raised against you, once again consult your broker. Like I said, it's always good to communicate with them regularly and often. If an allegation of professional misconduct has been raised, EXA will likely investigate in terms of their code and conduct. There may be repercussions from EXA, but they will not be involved in attributing liability. That will be managed through either litigation or the alternative dispute resolutions. Some examples of professional misconduct is to not properly review documents, but still sign off. This often happens, as we said, make sure that the documents leaving the practice are signed off or checked by senior staff. Sometimes there isn't enough time to do this properly, and the documents are sent out, and they may have errors, and it is considered professional misconduct. Not disclosing design errors. If a document goes out and you are aware that there is an error in the design, and that design may have that error may lead to massive economic loss or loss of life, and you don't disclose that, that's also professional misconduct. Hiding project shortcomings to protect your client. Your relationship with your client might be under strain, and you realize if you expose these, that it might take on more strain. But the project shortcomings could similarly lead to massive problems. So it's better to rather expose these and at least be in communication with your clients. Knowingly giving wrong evidence. You may be appointed as a senior expert in a court case, and you realize you asked a technical question and you realize that your answer may help the opposing side more than your side. If you give the wrong answer, that's also considered professional misconduct. And then giving or taking bribes. And I think, in this country, corruption has enough of a seat to not be taking place in our industry. So that's also very much professional misconduct. So yeah, those, I mean, there's many more, but those are a few that come to mind. Yeah. So in conclusion, to deal with the best way to deal with a PI claim is to prevent it from happening. Obviously, having a quality management system and a risk management system in place will go a long way to preventing this. Acting as the reasonable person and following good industry practice will further help your case. When it does happen, do not admit liability. Rather contact your broker and ask for advice. And lastly, always act professionally. This will ensure that the rest of the job gets done and that no allegations of professional misconduct will take place. And that's my last slide. Thanks, Wally. Back over to you.